What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today, with a lot of new players coming to Battlefront 2 recently, I thought I'd start a beginner's guide series for all of those new players, and today we're going to be starting off with a beginner's guide to heroes vs villains. Now, these are going to be fairly basic guides for the most part, nothing too advanced or in-depth, but if you do want more in-depth guides on heroes, maps and classes, then be sure to check out the rest of the channel, as there are plenty of guides that I have already done, and if you are new to the channel, then consider subscribing so you don't miss out on any of the upcoming beginner's guides. But with that out of the way, we're going to jump straight into it, starting off with some basic tips that are relevant for both blasters and sabers. The first tip that I can give, and this is arguably the most important tip to follow in this game mode, is to make sure that you are always sticking with your teammates. Heroes vs villains is not generally the type of game mode where you can run around on your own and expect to do well. You might get lucky every now and then and have a good game, but for the most part, if you're on your own, you're going to end up dying over and over and over again. Now, if you see an enemy all on his own away from your teammates, then sure, going to challenge the 1v1 there isn't necessarily a bad idea, but once you do take care of a 1v1, you should always try and get back to the rest of your teammates as fast as possible, because the longer that you're away from them, the more likely it is that you will get caught in a 3v1 or a 4v1 and pretty much end up with no chance of survival. If you do play with friends, then obviously sticking close by is going to be a lot easier since you have communication over the mics, but if you're just playing with randoms, then it is best to pretty much find them and essentially stick to them like glue for as much of the game as you can. In this game mode, the team who sticks together the most almost always wins the game, and so like I said, this is arguably the most important tip I can give. Next up is a pretty small little tip, but that is to do your best to avoid any areas with edges, as you will most likely get yeeted off the edge, especially if you are playing as a blaster user. Maps like Bespin, Kashyyyk, Camino and Naboo are all really dangerous when it comes to the force pushes and just ragdoll abilities in general, so it's not to say you should completely avoid these areas, but just try and play it smart and not leave yourself open to a free kill. Lastly, for the basic tips, it is very important as to which character you choose and how you play that character. If your team is all lightsabers, for example Vader, Dooku and Grievous, then you might want to choose a character like Iden or Boba Fett, as that takes it from a team of all sabers to a team that can dominate up close and also pose a threat at range because of that blaster hero. On the other side of that, if everyone on your team has a blaster, for example Han, Leia and Finn, then you'd probably be best to choose a character like Luke or Yoda to pretty much draw the enemies into close range fights, leaving the rest of your team to stay back a few meters and blast the enemies while you are fighting them. This really does just come down to some practice over time and getting to know which combinations work the best, because it is pretty much impossible to tell right away when you've only just gotten the game, but once you do get the hang of it, then your character choices will go a long way towards not only winning more games, but also just doing better in terms of kills per game. Now, speaking of character choices, I am going to move on to two general tips for Saber heroes and two general tips for Blaster heroes, and these are pretty much just tips that are fairly basic but also very relevant to pretty much any characters in those categories. Starting off with the Saber users, and the first tip I'm going to give is to actually not swing spam against Blaster heroes, as tempting as it might be. Because Blaster heroes have no form of defense, i.e. a lightsaber to block attacks, it can be very tempting to just spam the hell out of them when you're close enough, since it does seem like it will result in a quick kill, but more often than not it can actually go the other way. When a blaster hero rolls, they gain somewhere between half a second to a second of damage immunity, meaning even if you time it perfectly, they'll just roll right through your saber and likely end up behind you while your guard is down. What you want to do in that situation is swing once to try and land an early hit, and then once you do, they'll generally roll to avoid being hit a second time, but instead of swinging again, you want to actually let them roll, because as soon as they finish that roll, they'll once again be vulnerable to attack. If they roll again straight after the first one, then again, let them roll, and once they stand back up from that roll, then you can land one or two easy hits before rinsing and repeating. The next tip I have is once again in relation to fighting blaster heroes, and this tip is very simple. Do not jump when a blaster hero is shooting at you. If you do jump, you're going to drop your guard, as well as giving them a relatively easy target to shoot at, and you essentially just have to wait until you get back to the ground before you can do anything about it. So that tip is a really simple one, but I see a lot of people doing this, and that is definitely not the answer in that situation. Now, obviously neither of those tips were for sabers versus sabers, but I do actually have an entire video on how to win lightsaber battles in Battlefront 2, so I will leave a card up in the top right if you do want to go and check that one out. Moving on now to the last two tips for blaster heroes, and the first one is that you should always try and play more of a support role rather than playing too aggressive. Now, don't get me wrong, if you're a good enough player, then you can absolutely dominate entire teams as Han or Boba, but I'm going to assume most people watching this are relatively new since it is for beginners, and so you should definitely try and play more of a support role if that is the case. What I mean by a support role is pretty much just not being the one to lead the charge, rushing around the map and being the first to each battle, but rather leaving that for your Saber hero teammates while you sit 10 or 20 meters away firing at the enemies while they're distracted. There are also a lot of great abilities that the blaster users have that can really change the course of the match, such as Finn's Big Deal ability and Phasma's turret, so that feeds even more into that support type of role for a lot of the blaster users. Now, the last tip feeds into that one a fair bit, and this one is pretty much that you want to just make the most of the added distance. One thing that blaster heroes have that Saber heroes don't have is range, and so you want to do your best to use that to your advantage, because once they get close then you're going to be the one at a huge disadvantage instead. Try to land as many shots as you can at range. Even if they're blocking, then that's just going to put them under pressure and slow them down a bit, and then it is even worth using any abilities that you can to try and cause a bit of damage before they get too close. But that is pretty much it for this one, guys. Like I said, they were some very basic tips, but I'm sure if you have just picked up the game with PlayStation Plus, then they will hopefully come in handy. If you enjoyed the video, then make sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new, then consider subscribing to the channel with those notifications on so you don't miss any of the upcoming beginner's guides. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.